which would be right in the middle of the questions on lesson, 5? And I put two lessons back there. Trying to stay ahead. But we were introduced to this section last week by the fact that Solomon had and loved many wives. 700 wives and 300 concubines. And they turned his heart away from the Lord. And so the Lord told him that he was going to take the kingdom away from him, but he would not take the whole kingdom away from him because of David and because of Jerusalem's sake. So in verse 14 of chapter 11, what did God do? Yeah, he raised up an adversary to Solomon, and not only one adversary, by the way, 3 adversaries he's going to introduce. The first one is who?
Excuse me, girl, is that the same word for, we talk about the devil, we talk about Satan, is that the same?
Is that?
Oh, adversary, the same word? Yeah.
I don't think so.
It's not the same word?
It is.
Ha.
It is Satan.
Ha.
It is. It is Satan, or Satan, as you would say it in anglicized. Satan. Says it's translated as Satan 19 times, as adversary 7 times, as withstand or opposed to 1 time. So yes, it is. It is the word that's translated as Satan. Now, so guess what? Guess who Satan was in this context? See? We think Satan as just one great big adversary of God. And by the way, I'm glad you said that because I'm doing Revelation on Wednesday nights, and we're going to be talking about it shortly. We're going to be at chapter 12 shortly. Anyway. Who did he raise up first? Who was the first adversary? Yeah, the Edomite. Now, Hadad the Edomite probably is, and I'm not sure about this, but probably is the name for the king, like Pharaoh, or Caesar, or probably is that. But notice of Edom, he's the Edomite. He was of the royal land in Edom, see. And it came about when David was in Edom, and Joab the commander had gone up to bear the slain, and had struck down every male in Edom. So David created an enemy of Hadad and Edom whenever he dealt with all that. Joab and all Israel stayed there 6 months until he had cut off every male from Edom. But Hadad had fled to Egypt. Remember that. I'm going to come back to that fled to Egypt idea in a minute. He fled to Egypt, had certain Edomites of his father's servants with him while he was a young boy. They arose from Midian and came to Paran, and took men from Paran and came to Egypt to Pharaoh, who gave him a house, assigned him food, gave him land. Now see, Pharaoh wouldn't do that to just an ordinary person who's coming down to, it has to be royal. And notice, verse 19. Pharaoh gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife. Well, Pharaoh had given Solomon his daughter. So all these political things going on in the world, folks, that's what it is. It's political. So just because Egypt is subservient to Israel now, Solomon, that don't mean they want to be.
Right.
And so they're always scheming and plotting behind the scenes. And by the way, we're not unfamiliar with that, are we? We know something a little bit about politics in America. bore his son Genubath, and by the way, he lived in Pharaoh's house. Was trained by Pharaoh's teachers. Do y'all know anybody else that lived in Pharaoh's house and was raised like Pharaoh's son? Isn't that interesting? That's just interesting to me when you see the history play out in the different ones. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers and Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Send me back that I can go back to my own country." He said, "What have you lacked with me?" And he said, "Nothing, but you need to let me go." And so that's the introduction of the first adversary, the Edomites. Hadad the Edomite. Now the second one is who? Yeah, Rezon. And he had gathered himself men, became a leader of a marauding band after David slew those of Zobah. And they went to Damascus. Now let me remind you that Damascus is the capital of Syria. And Syria becomes the enemy of Solomon, the adversary of Solomon. And of course Hadad is the ruler of Syria, you see. Now, well, let me get to the next one. And then we get to probably the most famous of all, or maybe infamous. Who was the third adversary? Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who's going to get the 10 tribes. He's going to get the 10 northern tribes of Israel, you see, and that's going to become the nation of Israel. And so the enemies of Judah, the enemies of Rehoboam and Judah, is going to be Hadad, Jeroboam, and Edom. Syria, Samaria, Israel, and Edom. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Listen, folks, we're introduced to these things, and this is going to play all the way through the history of the kings, all the way through. We're just introduced to them here. They're not, they're not now in power, as it were. We're just introduced to them who they're going to be in power, and they're going to be adversaries of Solomon. And when Ahaz is on the throne of Judah, and who are the two enemies? Syria and Samaria, Israel. And he cries out, looks to Egypt or Assyria for help, wants to buy them off. And God said, "You should ask me." And it was during the reign of Ahaz when Syria and Samaria were adversarial to Judah that God said, "Young woman will be with child, and the virgin will be with child," and that's the sign that he gives Ahaz that those enemies are going to be gone away with. The two enemies are Syria and Samaria. That's who they are at that time. Now I'm getting ahead of myself in the history, but I'm just showing you. This is going to play out big time, folks. This is a big story. And by the way, what does that say to us about God and history? That he controls. His providential sovereignty is overall, and in the process of him being providentially sovereign, as it were, he never violates the will of those other people. He lets them have their will and still gets his will in the process of it all. So, big time introduced. Remember, that's important. So Jeroboam, and we hadn't talked about him. The reason why he rebelled ultimately against the king was Solomon built the Millo, and we talked about that being that breach, the city and the wall in the valley. Well, evidently Jeroboam, you see, was put in charge of that labor in some way. And so, you got to be careful. If you get, what's the old saying? If you give somebody an inch, but if you give them an inch, you'll want to be a ruler. That's the point. Give him an inch and he'll want to be a ruler. So Jeroboam wants to be a ruler. He gets a little power and he starts feeling it and so forth. And so when Jeroboam went out to Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him on the road, and he clothed himself with a new cloak, and there alone, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak and tore it into what? 12 pieces. And what did he say to Jeroboam? You get 10, because I'm going to tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and give you 10 tribes. But he will have one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem. Now, one tribe, of course, is Benjamin. Okay? I mean, he's Judah. Okay? The son is Judah. And one tribe is Benjamin. And Rehoboam is going to get 10 tribes. So that leaves two. You know there are 12 tribes. You don't know how to count them. So 12 tribes. So we count, one is, just one would be 11. No, you got to give Judah to him because that's who he is. He is Judah. And then Benjamin is the tribe that's given to him. So you got 2 tribes in the south, 10 tribes in the north. For the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel. And I'm taking it away, he says, because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the god of the Sidonians, Chemosh of Moab, Milcom of the Ammonites, not walked in my ways, doing what's right in my sight, and observing my statutes as his father did. Nevertheless, he says, I'll not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I'll make him a ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of my servant David whom I chose, but I'll take the kingdom from his son's hand and give it to you, even 10 tribes. But to his son I'll give 1 tribe, that my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem, the city where I've chosen to put myself in my name. So I'll take you, and you will reign over whatever you desire, and you shall be king over Israel. And remember, Israel now is the name for the northern 10 tribes. Judah is the name of the southern tribes. And that'll be the way it is as you read the book of Kings now. Maybe seldom, maybe sometimes, maybe minutely. When Israel is mentioned, it may mean the whole nation, but I can't remember a place where it does. I can't remember. So remember, Samaria, Israel are the same nation. See, Samaria became the capital of the northern tribes, Israel. Ephraim. So Samaria, Israel, and Ephraim are talking about the same people. Judah is, of course, always the southern tribes, the two. So he says it'll be that if you listen to all I command you and walk in my ways, then I'll be with you and build you an enduring house as I built for David, and I'll give you Israel. Now, thus I will afflict the sons of David for this, but not always. By the way, yes, the promise of still one of his descendants is going to be on the throne, and that's Messiah, that's Jesus. Solomon sought therefore to put Jeroboam to death, but Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak of Egypt, and he was in Egypt till the death of Solomon. So Hadad came back to Syria when David died and Jeroboam was dead, and it changed, and that's when he started to be a thorn in Solomon's side, as it were, the adversary. But Jeroboam don't come back until after Solomon dies and Rehoboam is ascending to the throne. Now, I needed to say something here somewhere. So he told him that if he would do what's right and observe my commandments, I'll be with you. How long did Jeroboam's dynasty last? It lasted only to the next generation. His son was killed, and the kingdom was usurped from him. I'm not sure I have this on since I redid but I probably did. I've given this to y'all before. I've given y'all this chart before, but if I hadn't, tell me and I'll get you another one or whatever. But when the kingdom divided, Rehoboam got the south, Jeroboam got the north, and his son reigned 2 years and was killed, and Baasha took the kingdom, and then he reigned through his son, and then Zimri killed him and took the kingdom, and there were just numerous dynasties of Israel. You know, later on, Jehu. Remember, Jehu was the one that trying to remember, was it Ahab or Ahaz was the king, and God was going to take it away from him, you know, and Jehu was partying with his guys. He was a general, and the prophet came to tell him God was going to give the kingdom to him, you know, and he said, "Get out of here, you're not going to do that for me." He said, "Yeah," and so Jehu went and killed the king of Judah and the king of Israel. And so the king of Judah's son took his place, but the king of Israel, Jeroboam killed all his descendants. He said, "Who's with me? If you're with me, I want the heads of his descendants stacked on either side of the gate." So the next dynasty. So over and over and over again, when you see Israel, you know, because they were idolatry. Jeroboam led them off into idolatry. And if God took the kingdom away from Solomon because his wife took him off into idolatry, what's he going to do with the other king? Well, just kind of giving you the history of the picture, folks, the big picture. You can do with that what you want to. So he's not going to last long. But the rest of the Acts of Solomon and whatever he did in his wisdom, they're written in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Where's that? Where's that book in? We don't have it.
We don't have that book.
We don't have that book. How do we know that? Was there such a book as that? Well, yeah. By inspiration it says it was, you know. So do we have everything that's mentioned in the Bible, you know, that? We don't. We only have what God gives us for us to have faith in him and his working out his purpose. We have the evidence that we need to learn to trust God. Thus, the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over Israel was 40 years. So remember, Saul was 40 years, David was 40 years, Solomon was 40 years. He slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of his father David, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his place. So Rehoboam is going to take the throne over the 12 tribes.
And Rehoboam was the son from Pharaoh's daughter?
I'm not even sure of that. That's a good question. I don't even know that we know, to tell you the truth. That goes to Chronicles, but I don't. Yeah, I don't even think we're told who was his mother. I'll do some research on that. Now, so he went to Shechem because they'd come there to make him king. And when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, he was living in Egypt. They sent him and called him, and he came, and all the assembly of Israel came. So, you know, we got this Reader's Digest blurb, condensed blurb, because did Israel know that Rehoboam was going to be like that to start with? Nah. So why would they have sent for Jeroboam to come and, you know, that's it. So all this played out over the time of their relationship. Rehoboam began to show himself to be the tyrant he was, and so they called Jeroboam, you know, to come and help and lead. So whatever you want to do with that. So Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, said, what did he say?
That your father
Yeah. Remember what Samuel told Israel was going to happen to them when they got a king? They were told taxes, you know, draft for the army, for labor, the whole process, of what we got today. And so your father made our yoke hard. Well, listen, folks, Israel was at the height of prosperity during Solomon's reign. At the very height. Everybody had a car in the garage and a chicken in the pot. They were at the height of prosperity. They were America in 1955. And, then things changed. And it's interesting to me, by the way, that America was at its greatest prosperity and peace and, wide, right after World War II. Right after the war. I'm not sure how to deal with that. We've had wars since then, and that because of finances, because they wanted to change finances in America for the better. But nothing has done it like that did. Nothing has accomplished it like that did. And by the way, interesting, that generation also, remember Tom Brokaw wrote his book about that generation, which is the integrity of the, it was during that generation that the gospel was preached, we had more missionaries worldwide at that time than any other time in our history. And that because of the soldiers who had gone over there to see the needs of the people, and they came and then they went back to be missionaries to those people, which was great. And then, the richer we got, the less we supported our missionaries. How about that for churches of Christ? Anyway, that's it. I just like that history anyway, so lighten our burden. And he said, give me 3 days to think about it, And so he counseled with the elders who had served his father, and they said, if you'll be a servant to the people, then grant them their petition and speak good words, and they'll serve you forever. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they'd given him, and consulted with the young men who grew up with him. And the young men said, thus you shall say to the people who spoke to you, your father made our yoke heavy, now you'll make it lighter for us. But you speak to them and say, my little finger is thicker than his thigh. My little finger will be harder on you than the big part of his leg. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I'll add to your yoke. He disciplined you with whips, I'll discipline you with scorpions. Well, that's going to win friends and influence people. And so they came back and he told them that, what the young people had said, didn't listen to them. And so when all Israel did not listen to them, the people answered the king saying, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse, so to your tents, O Israel. Now look after your own house, David. So they departed to their tents. They went home. And for a little while, you see, Rehoboam still tries to be king over it all. He still tries to be king over the whole thing. The sons of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah, he reigned over them. Rehoboam sent to Adoram, who was over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death. So he's sending them up, up north because he's going to build some more buildings and more taxes and more forced labor, and so they just stoned his ambassador there. King Rehoboam made haste to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. To what day? To the day he wrote the letter to King. To that day. When this man's sitting there writing this, whatever he's writing, that's the day he's talking about. So it's not modern. It's them. It's back then. But guess what? They're not today.
Right.
And interesting, by the way, I saw a Facebook thing from one young girl. She used to, her mom and daddy, Ricka Martin, not Ricka, Gretchen, Ray and Jean Martin's daughter. She married a Jewish man and converted to Judaism, and she was talking about Happy Birthday Israel this week. So evidently, you're talking about the restoration when they redid the state in 1945 or 40, you know, which is kind of sad to me.
What do you do? What do you say to people who convert to different? I mean, and they know the word. I mean, what do you say to them?
I generally say bye. No, because listen, they're not going to listen to you. All of you can talk to your blue in the face until something happens that will make them listen, or that put them in a position where they want to listen. All you can do is pray for them, love them. When you get an opportunity to say something, say it, but don't say it, you know, beating them over the head and argumentatively type stuff. You know, you just live and practice your Christianity. You do what you do because you're a Christian. Listen, God will let them choose whatever they want to. Why can't we? Why can't we let them choose? Well, we don't want to let them choose because we don't want them going to hell. Well, God don't want them going to hell either, but He lets them choose. It's not that He wants them to, it's that He's not going to force them to. Well, see, that's what we need to learn when we're dealing with each other and when we're dealing with people in general. Listen, we are not better than God, so shut up. You know, I wouldn't say that to anybody else.
We probably need to say that. Just like that.
I can say it to y'all. And then Jesus will watergate me. Anyway. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day, the writer says, you know. So when he wrote this letter, now, let me remind y'all again, one more time. This is just free, okay? Notice that in 1 Kings chapter 1, David is old and about to die. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to where we are so I can get back there real quick. But in 1 Chronicles, chapter 1, Adam. Now, 1 Chronicles and 1 Kings are not parallels. And they're not, what do we call it when we want to put all the Gospels together? Anyway, you know, we want to put it all together so we have one story. Yeah. And bless their hearts, you know, I keep saying, if God had wanted us to have it all together, He would put it all together to start with. Same thing's true with Chronicles. Notice that 1 Chronicles starts with Adam, and you don't get to David for quite a while in the book of Chronicles, folks. You don't get to Solomon. Chronicles was written after the return of the Jews from Babylonian captivity. Kings was written to show, it was written about the time before they went into captivity to show why they went into captivity. Chronicles was not written to show why they went into captivity. Chronicles was written to give them some hope after they came back out of captivity. And we need to remember that when we read and study Chronicles. Of course, bless our hearts, we're not going to read and study Chronicles because we've studied Kings. That's just like we're not going to read and study Mark because we studied Matthew. You get the same material in Matthew.
But it's to a different audience. I mean,
It's
it was
a
written to
completely
so
different
why would
audience.
we not study it?
I'm sorry?
I said, why would we not study it?
Because it says something we've already read in Kings.
No, I mean, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're very similar, but they're to different audiences.
But that's true. But it's because well, I read this in Matthew, so I'll skip it over to Mark. And I read over it in Luke. And we do that.
Yeah.
We do that without, see? And we shouldn't,
Right,
you see. We ought to study each book on its own merit. Well, y'all know my house,
Up here in the library,
how to study the Bible.
started as a young man, praise following Jesus, and these books up here.
Now, so
I read them and gave it to the Lord to read.
it came about when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly, made him king over all Israel. None but the tribe of Judah followed the house of David. Well, Benjamin, you know, the Rehoboam had come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. 180,000 men, and he's going to take these two little tribes and go fight the 10. He's going to go fight and restore the kingdom. Now, think about that when you read Jesus' parable about, you know, if a man goes out to battle and he has an army of, you know, 10,000 men, and he's going up against an army of 1 million men, what's the first thing he needs to do? Yeah, count that cost. He needs to count that cost. Well, you know, it's amazing how young, stupid people can't count costs. They can't think about their decisions, what they're doing. I want what I want when I want it. So the Lord sent Shemaiah, the prophet, telling him, you must not go up and fight against your relatives, the sons of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing has come from me. And they listened to the word of the Lord and returned and went their way. So Rehoboam had to be content with ruling the two tribes of Judah. And then, of course, we start the story. See, here's old Jeroboam, who's going to become he's going to become the description of every king that passes, that survives it. Every king comes, and by the way, they won't all be of his family, but he will be the comparison. The king will be either like Jeroboam or not, and it'll describe all the heinous crimes of Jeroboam against the northern tribes, and every king of Israel will be compared to Jeroboam. And in Israel, there's only a couple that are even, they're not halfway good, that are even a little bit good. In Judah, there are a few that try to pursue David's lifestyle, but most of them turn their back. But Israel is taken off into captivity in 721 BC by Assyria. Now, but there are a couple of things we need to say. Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim is the tribe that was Joseph's son. Okay. When you read the 12, the dispersion of the land, by the way, remember Levi didn't get a tribe. I mean, they didn't get a land, and Joseph is never mentioned by land. But Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the two sons of Joseph, are mentioned. So we still get 12 parcels of land. You see the point? That's the point. We still get 12 parcels of land. Levi don't get land because they're priests. They get the city. Joseph's two sons get land, so we still have 12. Now, he built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim. That's Israel. See, that's the north country. He lived there. Left there and built Penuel. He set in his heart. Now the kingdom will do what? Why would they do that? If they keep going up to Jerusalem, to the temple to worship, then the heart of this people will return to the Lord. Boy, he's a smart old boy. He is a sharp politician. So he said, if it returns to the Lord, they'll kill me and return to Rehoboam. Now, God had said, Jeroboam, this will be yours, and if you will obey me, if you'll serve me, then it'll stay yours. He didn't believe that. He didn't trust the Lord. He had to do it himself. Now, of course, we don't have to do stuff like that today. We don't have to beat people over the head with the Bible so make them be saved, or we don't have to do things our way. We always do things the Lord's way, don't we? You know I'm being sarcastic. And so he couldn't trust God. They'll kill me, he says. So he consulted, and he did what? Now, where in the world did they learn that from? Where did they learn about golden calves? Well, Egypt, and by the way, yeah, yeah. Well, he's consulting wise men about how are we going to keep them from going back down to Jerusalem to worship, so that they won't turn back to God and kill me and take my kingdom away from me. See, he's finding wise men to figure out how to keep them up north, keep them from going back down south. So he makes the 2 golden calves, and by the way, harkens back to Aaron, of course, on Mount Sinai. But why would Aaron make a golden calf? You know, because of Egypt. So Egypt. And so he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. So behold your gods, O Israel, that what? Now, the 2 golden calves. Now, let me tell you something, folks. We read that as though Jeroboam was saying, these are 2 different gods that I'm giving you. That's not what he was saying. Remember that the word Elohim is plural. And we argue and we talk and we listen to our scholars, which sometimes we have to do, because, let's see, we have God the Father, and we have God the Son, and we have God the Holy Spirit. 3 gods. Not 3 gods? So 1 God. Huh. So these 2, you see, weren't considered 2 gods. They were considered 1 God, or, you know, like Elohim would be. That's what he's trying to do, a substitute for Elohim, you know. That's what he's trying to do. And he's trying to keep them, so he's making it convenient for them to worship the God in their mind and heart who brought them out of Egypt. He's trying to convert them over to the fact that this, you can worship God here. You don't have to go down to Jerusalem. But God said, Jerusalem is where I put my name, you see. That's, you see. But he's substituting, and he's not saying, okay, I want y'all to worship 2 different gods. Let's make 2 idols, and we'll have idolatry. Remember, idolatry always started as an image of God himself, not another God. That's why the 2nd commandment says, no images. They weren't making images to worship other gods, folks. They were making images to have something they could see that would represent God. And see, then it progressed or digressed. You know.
That's why the Catholic Church got their icon.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you know what they'll tell you? What happened today? Well, it restarted. Anyway, yeah, I kicked my thing, kicked the thing down here.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I kicked the thing down here. Probably gonna do it again. Anyway, so yeah, it's coming. So by the way, so
A different God.
when they came out of Egypt, Egypt had gods. Whoa, wait, let's go back further than that. When Jacob went to Laban's house, and Laban and Ur of the Chaldees, they served God. Well, wait, let's go further than that. Abraham's, Joshua said, Abraham's descendants, his ancestors, were idol worshippers in Babylon. Abraham was called out of idol worship. So idol worship goes way back farther than Sinai, way back farther than we even think about.
So
And-
you think it was,
I'm sorry?
did it start with, you got, Cain's lineage?
Yeah.
Lineage?
Probably.
Probably started.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember that God drove Cain out, and so Cain's not having fellowship with God. And so Cain wants to have fellowship with God, and so what does he do? You know, and all these idols, I keep saying every time man makes himself a god, he makes himself a god he can sin with. Every time man makes himself a god, he makes him a god he can sin with. And so you get all that garbage that goes on with idolatry, you see, because man wants to do his own thing in the name of God and Cain. That's idolatry, you see. So Jeroboam was not introducing other gods when he introduced his idolatry. Those idols were supposed to represent God. But they weren't supposed to make those things, and they definitely weren't supposed to come and worship God like that in those places. So where were we? Kings 10 or 12?
12, 27, I believe.
Okay, thank you for being so patient. Even though you just have to.
True.
So he does that, you see, and made houses on the high places and made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi.
So he just went all out.
Yeah, so he made the worship God. He made priests like the priests of Israel. He made, the places to worship like down south, so they wouldn't have. He instituted a feast in the 8th month of the 15th day, like the feast which is in Judah. By the way, the Passover. Went up the altar, thus he did in Bethel, sacrificing to calves which he had made. He stationed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he had made. Went up the altar on the 15th day of the 8th month which is probably the month of Nisan, because remember that Passover is on that day every year. I won't rehash the Sabbath idea of the feast days, but you need to remember that. But even in the month which he had devised in his own heart, and he instituted a feast for the sons of Israel. So he didn't. So he's established in his kingdom because he keeps them up north under his thumb, under his rulership. And I want to get into 13 here, folks, because this is the beginning of the end, as it were. We have this story here. There was a man came from Judah, man of God from Judah to Bethel. So remember, Judah is up here. By the way, remember Jerusalem and Judah. Jerusalem sits on a hill. By the way, it's interesting to me, I don't know who, but y'all know that every time the Bible says something about they came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, well, if you looked on the map, Antioch is north on the map, but it's not up geographically, it's lower. The Bible is always true geographically, by the way. It's interesting to think about things like that. So he didn't want him to go up to Jerusalem to worship. The man came came from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord. So why did he come up there? Lord sent him. Lord sent him. While Jeroboam was standing by the altar to burn incense. Now, and he cried against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, a descendant of David. And who is he going to be? Josiah. How many hundreds of years from now? Hundreds. Not only was Josiah not a gleam in his daddy's eye, his daddy wasn't a gleam in his grandpa's eye. Or on back. And he calls him by name over 400 years before he was ever even thought about, much less born. Calls him by name. This man by the name of Josiah is going to be born to the house of David, and on you, altar, he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you. And human bones shall be burned on you. Getting ahead of myself. When Josiah comes to the kingdom and tries to purge the kingdom, he comes up to that altar and says, what's that? Actually, he comes to, says, and burn all those, dig up all those priests and all those old prophets and burn their bones on that altar even, he says. Now remember that, where comes that? And he gave a sign the same day. This is the sign. Behold, the altar shall be split apart and the ashes on it which are poured out. And so as he stood before the altar and prophesied against the altar, he said, this altar is going to split apart and then all the ashes are going to fall. And when the king heard it, he stretched out his hand from the altar saying, seize him. But the hand that he stretched out against him dried up so that he could not draw it back to himself. Reaches out for a hand of power and it winds up being just a weak nothing, and what? The altar was split apart and the ashes were poured out from the altar. So we have a sign that says something's going to happen in the future. And this thing that happened here assures you that it's going to happen in the future. Now, behold, a virgin shall be with child. She'll conceive and be with child. And we read that and say that was a sign to Ahaz. And I'm here to tell you that wasn't a sign to Ahaz. That was a sign to the nation about the virgin birth. But the sign to Ahaz was not the virgin birth, because Ahaz was dead for hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born. So that would have no meaning to Ahaz as far as the solution to his problem is concerned. And yet we read the Bible and we listen to our teachers, by the way. We listen to our journals and say, that's right. You have a short-term sign miracle to say the long-term miracle is going to take place. God did that over and over and over again. So it stood apart according to the sign. And the king said to the man of God, entreat the Lord your God. Notice he didn't say, my God. That's interesting. Entreat the Lord your God and pray for me that my hand may be restored to me. So he entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored, and it became like it was before. And the king said to the man, come home with me and refresh yourself, and I'll give you a reward. The man of God said to the king, if you were to give me half of your house, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread or drink water in this place. For so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, You shall eat no bread or drink no water, nor return by the way which you came. So he went another way and did not return by the way he went to Bethlehem. Now, y'all, we got 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop right there. We introduced the old prophet, and we introduced the prophecy of Josiah.